Hey guys, welcome back. In this video we're going to be taking a look at a very difficult endgame, and that is the Queen versus Rook endgame. And there's a lot of videos about the first position that we'll be taking a look at. So let's hop right into this and see what's going on here. We're going to be covering a bunch of different patterns that you can use to help increase your odds of winning this really difficult endgame. Okay, so first and foremost is the Philidor position. So if you search YouTube, you can find a lot of videos about this. So I'm going to cover this one briefly since it's the simplest, and you can find other resources about this. But basically, we're going to reach this position, and black is basically in a Zugzwang here. They have to move their rook away because there's no other moves that will work. Of course, none of these moves really quite work. So basically their best bet is to move their rook as far away as possible. But now white has an interesting sequence to eventually obtain a really long range fork. And so that can start with queen e5, king a7, queen d4, and then it doesn't really much matter where black is going to go. Of course, if they go to a6, then they could get checkmated just right on the a file. So, for example, king b8, queen h8, and now you can see where we're going with this. So, one key thing, not only in the Philidor, but also in lots of other positions, is just to make sure that you're checking where the rook is weak and if it's going to be possible to make a fork. So that's a key thing. In other positions, we'll see white can use a skewer to their advantage, but we can see after this, black is indeed going to lose their rook. So no matter what's going on, white is going to win here very quickly. Okay, next position that we'll look at that I haven't really seen much of, so this could be a good resource for anyone that's learning this ending. I dubbed this position the disco, so kind of a fun one in this position. I started this off with white's move, but this position is even better if it's black's move here. So almost the same principle as before. We want to have our opponent move, and they're going to have to hurt themselves, and then we can gain from that. So disco, because we have an interesting discovery happening here. And for example, white can pass the move over to black. Even if they reach this position and it happens to be white's move, they can just sort of go queen e3 here, just stay within this sort of discovery. King a6, queen d3, king, kind of needs to come back here. You can't really make much progress in other ways. So king a7, and then queen d4. So we're going to pass the move over to black, and then they really don't have many options here, right? Rook b3, it's going to be met with a fork. b2 is off limits. Rook coming to b1. This is probably just going to get hit with the same move that we were looking for before. So, for example, rook b7, king c6. That's why this is so powerful, because we can move our king into position. That's usually the final square that we need, so it's completely limiting black's options. And we can't get checked back. So that's the reason why delivering this discovered check with our king is so powerful. So king a8. And then if I give you guys a moment to pause the video, how could you force a Philidor position? Okay, so if you found queen a1, then good job. Or queen h8 actually. In this example I put queen a1. So it's kind of a mirror image, so note that you can use either way to obtain a Philidor position. King b8, queen a5, and then we're back to that example that we first saw. That was indeed winning for white. Okay, so that's kind of our little disco right here. We just are going to use this really powerful technique just to make sure that our king can move with a temp. So that's the reason why that position is so powerful, and you should definitely memorize that position. Okay, Next position, this position is called the albatross. I think I saw maybe one interesting video about this at some point, but I think it was deeply buried and I haven't seen this very often. So I think it's worthwhile to go ahead and show this type of position, at least maybe for this video. So in this case, it's black's move, and we're going to see why this is a terrible position for black. There's a very easy win for white, and it's not hard to find, and black has very few options. So as we said before, white has a lot of forking patterns, but in this case white is going to have a lot of skewers. So notice that black cannot move their rook too far. If they move it 2 squares away from their king, then they're always going to get hit with a skewer. So none of these moves work. They can't move their rook out. If black does other things, then they're definitely going to get punished, right? Rook d6, that's going to fail to like queen a7, and then they're just going to drop their rook. So it's really difficult to recommend a good move for black here. And perhaps rook d8, probably queen a7, king c8 is forced, and then king c6, and that will not stale, so black doesn't have any tricky stalemate things that we'll take a look at also. So you can see there's really not much for black to do. They basically just have rook e7. That's basically their only move. Now we're going to see how we're going to convert this same position over and over and over again until we walk black all the way down the board and there's nothing that they can do about it. So that's why this position is so powerful. So queen a7, they have to come back and guard their rook. Queen b8, king d7, and what should white play to renew this albatross position? Okay, so if you found king d5, then very good. So that's just going to repeat this pattern. We've just shifted every piece over to the right 1 square, and then they're back in that same terrible pattern. So rook f7, and then we're just going to repeat this over and over and over again until we walk our opponent to the other side of the board. And yes, there are some quicker ways that probably like an engine could find, but if you're playing this ending, then you probably won't have very much time on your clock, and it's also really difficult. So if you're playing against a really good player that has a really good defense, then it's going to be much better to just find something, even if it takes more moves. If you know that it's going to win, that's probably going to be a better shot for you and give you better chances. Okay, so we're finally at this position, and there's no I-file, so black can't bring their rook off the board. So now they're reduced to rook h1, and then we're going to make them walk the plank. So we're just going to land our queen on one of these squares, and our king is boxing this black king, and so he can't really be very mobile. And so we have tons of target squares. Oops. And it's going to be impossible for black to avoid a fork. So we're just going to make them walk the plank, and there's no way that they can avoid it. So eventually they're going to receive a fork, and it did take us quite a few moves to eventually win the rook. So this was actually 17 moves from start to finish when we were way back here. But just remember, as soon as we take their rook, then that's going to reset the 50 move rule. So if you were struggling to get to an albatross type position, and as long as you have 17 moves from the farthest that it could really happen, then you'll be okay. So we're going to get here and then finally take the rook, and then your 50 moves will be reset, and then you should be able to do this checkmate in just a couple of seconds. Okay, so that's our albatross. Definitely really useful. And this type of position, why it works so well is because the black rook, he is not on the correct side. So white is able to give tons, or threaten to give tons of different checks. Meanwhile, black is really helpless, and their rook is just a liability to be skewered, and the white king is in perfect position because, you know, black can't give checks because their king is blocking themselves, and they can't give checks, you know, for a multitude of reasons. Okay, so last things that we're going to take a look at is going to be the staling pitfalls. So that's going to be kind of what we need to avoid in general. So in this example, it's black's move, and black has a couple different ways to draw. So they can just start giving checks here, and we'll see why in this particular problem it's really bad for white. So just coming up through here, it seems like eventually the king can stop being checked, but of course there's the pin, and even in other cases, black can still use these types of tactics to hold a draw. So of course, like here, we can't capture because it's going to leave black in a stalemate. And there's other types of tricks that involve the stalemate. Like for example, when we bring our queen too close, it actually doesn't help. So for example, if we have something like this, let's say we start to give some checks, we try to bring our king too close, black has actually a good move that's going to immediately force a draw here. So I'll give you guys a second and see if you can figure out how black can immediately force a draw. Okay, so if you found rook f4, then very good. So lots of different types of ways that black can force a stalemate here. So of course white would need to capture this rook, because otherwise it's clearly a draw. So capturing, and then all these squares are going to be held down. So these are just a couple of stalemate pitfalls that we want to avoid. So moral of the story, when you're trying to have this checkmate happen, you want to make sure that your queen is usually far away from the enemy king, because that's going to avoid a lot of these types of problems. Okay, so that basically does it. Those are 4 really good patterns that you should know when trying to complete this checkmate. There are tons of other patterns with this checkmate, so it's not a complete list, but those are some really good ones that I think are really useful in upping your percentage of the times that you would be able to convert this ending. So if you guys did find this useful, then please give a thumbs up, and I will catch you guys in the next one. So long for now.